What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Clutch Talk. Episode 19 today, continuing season previews, rankings, all that stuff. And today I want to do the top 10 defensive lines in college football heading into the season. The season's only 20 days away. Super excited. Now, this does not include linebackers. This is just like the front four defensive lines. If we include linebackers, obviously the rankings would be much different. And how I rank these is in terms of like returning production, obviously, who's got tackles for loss, sacks, returning, who got a lot of quarterback pressures, how did the defensive line as a group play last year. And transfers did play a factor in this. Obviously, some transfers will be starting that will improve the ranking of a team, but also cohesiveness, I did throw that as a factor in there when looking at these rankings. Some of these teams, if it wasn't for having a full group of transfers, like one team I'm going to mention, I think I would have them much higher. But that's how I rank these teams. And yeah, we're going to get started today. If you like the video and like the content, please subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Continue to try to grow this channel as much as humanly possible. And let's get started today. And I'm going to start from 10, work my way up to number 1. And at number 10, at the top 10 defensive line heading into 2025, I got the Notre Dame Irish. Marcus Freeman's going to always have a good group up front just because of who he is defensively. But I think with the guys he's got in Jared Dawson, Joshua Burnham in particular, Junior Tua Halamaka as well, and the group overall I think has a lot of depth there as well, including outside those 4 starters. 37th in sacks per game last year, pretty good. 73rd in tackles for loss and 49th in rush yards allowed was pretty good, not the amazing though. They didn't blow you away with numbers, but I think with the depth, and again they dealt with a lot of injuries last year at the defensive line, I think getting more experience within the system, within the program. Again, not really transfers, just guys returning within the program. And injuries, guys being healthy this year, I think helps a lot as well. I think this Notre Dame Irish defense will be a top 10 defensive group overall. If I had to throw linebackers in, I think this is a top 5 front 7. But defensive line alone, I do think there is a little bit of question on the interior defensive line. And they got to get more sacks. I think they got to get after the quarterback more, pressure him a little bit more so that they're hanging on by a thread at 10. It's between them and Georgia, but I think with Georgia's such a lack of production there, you just don't know what you're getting. You know they're going to be 5-star talents, but you haven't seen them yet on a football field. I think Notre Dame fits in here at number 10, so that's where I start them off. At number 9, I got the Alabama Crimson Tide. LT Overton is a stud. The 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks didn't really do it justice for what he did last year, but he had 9 quarterback pressures. And then Tim Keenan, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the country, 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 2 quarterback hurries. And then James Smith had 5 hurries at defensive tackle. And John Marion Latham, a little unproven at the defensive end, but he's very, very talented and did pretty good in limited action last year. Defensive line numbers weren't amazing. 69 sacks allowed, 71st tackles for loss, and 48th in rush yards allowed. They got to be better numbers-wise as a defensive group. But LT Overton's going to have such a big jump in production. I expect a huge year out of him. He's kind of, to me, give me the breakout defensive star in the SEC and potentially in the country. And then going along that with Tim Keenan is definitely a top 10 group. John Marion Latham at defensive end still a question mark, and overall the depth behind them is a little bit of a question mark, though they're talented. Like I said, just a lack of production similar to Georgia, but you can't overstate the value and talent of LT Overton and Tim Keenan. So they will come in at number 9 for me. Number 8, I got the Florida Gators coming at number 8. Tyreek Sapp to me is a top 3 edge rusher in the SEC. 13 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, 5 pressures. Caleb Banks, very underrated as well. 7 tackles, 5 sacks, and 6 quarterback hurries. And then George Gumps, who had 4 pressures, 6 sacks, and 9 tackles for loss. The question is Breon Taylor, who's a new defensive tackle. I haven't seen much out of him. 2 tackles for loss and no sacks. But they were 11th in the country in sacks last year. Very good at getting pressure. 66 in rush yards allowed, 33rd in tackles for loss. This defense is going to be very good this year. To me, Florida has one of the best combinations of offensive line and defensive line groups in the country. They're going to be very good at the line of scrimmage. The only doubts I still have about Florida come from the wide receivers position and the secondary. There's still question marks around there, and plus their schedule is super difficult. But lines of scrimmage, I expect them to be very good in both those areas, and Tyreek Sapp's a stud. And I think they're going to continue to get a lot of sacks. I think they're going to continue to get tackles for loss. And I think the rushing defense will be better because Caleb Banks with another year. But I think Breon Taylor's got, they need him to provide something this year. just to add to the defensive line because depth behind them's okay. They're just very young. But I think they're a top 10 defensive line. They come in at number 8. I think they could have a very good year. I think Tyreek Sapp could be potentially SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Probably won't be, but there is potential for that. If he really, really breaks out, he could be SEC Defensive Player of the Year. So they come in at number 8. Number 7, I got a team where they performed horrendously defensively last year, but they brought in 4 transfers along the defensive front that are really good, and they're going to do a lot. And it's the Texas Tech Red Raiders. David Bailey out of Stanford is a stud behind there. 8 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 8 pressures. Lee Hunter, a defensive tackle, had 10 tackles for loss, 6 pressures. And then Skylar Gill Howard, 5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, and 4 pressures. And then Romello Height, 7 tackles, 4 sacks, and 3 pressures. The numbers won't do it justice because they were so bad last year defensively in every category. Passing, rushing, it didn't matter. But we're talking about 4 transfers, David Bailey being the star of that group. On the defensive front, they could be really good. I think they're the best defensive line in the Big 12 by far. I think the only team that's really close, you could say, is probably Kansas State. But I think Texas Tech's going to be the best defensive line in the Big 12 again. Transfer overhaul as a roster, so they're going to be very interesting to watch, particularly defensively, because, again, they were so bad and they needed to improve in that area. But I expect their defensive line to be top tier. If it wasn't for if they had more cohesiveness and not a bunch of transfers, they could be a top 5 group. But we still got to see them work together on a field in a new system, in a new environment, how they work. But to me, talent-wise, production from the previous schools they were at last year, they're a top 10 group. They come in at number 7. Number 6, I got the Miami Hurricanes. They're headlined by Ruben Bain, who was dealing with the calf injury last year, so his production doesn't really show the talent that he is. Had 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. And you can deal with that calf injury. David Blay out of Louisiana Tech is going to be really good. 6 tackles for loss, 6 sacks last year. And Akeem Messidor, 9 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, really good along the edge as well. They have 2 really good edge guys in Bain and Messidor. Justin Scott, a little unproven, but he'll be another starter at D tackle, 2 tackles for loss and a sack. They were 18th in sacks per game last year, 19th in rush yards allowed, and 37th in tackles for loss per game. Really good. People trashing that Miami defense last year was really because of the secondary, and the linebackers were just okay last year. They weren't anything amazing. But Ruben Bain being back to full health, I think, shows so much potential for this Miami defense. Because if he's fully healthy and Messidor improves, let's say, from last year, and you added David Blay out of the portal, who's a very underrated get that not many people are talking about, yeah, they're the best. They could be right up there with Clemson for best defensive line in the ACC. Clemson I have a little bit higher than Miami, but Miami's very good at the defensive line, and I think that's going to be the strength of this team this year until Carson Beck gets settled and those wide receivers get settled. I think their defensive line is going to be the strength of this football team this year for Miami, so they come in at number 6. Number 5, I got a team that is expecting a big jump from last year, and that's the Michigan Wolverines. They were really good on the defensive line last year. They're going to be really good. I know they lost Mason Graham, but they still got TJ Guy, who had 6 sacks and 6 pressures. Derek Moore, who had 4 sacks and 4 pressures. And then Brayshawn Benny, very underrated, 4 pressures, 4 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. And Trey Williams, who's kind of trying to take on the Mason Graham role, 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. 18th in sacks per game, 45th tackles for loss, and then 5th in rushing yards allowed. With Wink Martindale as a defensive coordinator, I don't think it really matters personnel-wise. I think with his scheme and the way they do things, their defensive line will generate pressure somehow, some way. And Michigan's not lacking talent. So I think they're going to be very good, very good on the defensive front. I think they're still going to be one of the best in the Big Ten, possibly the best if they hit their absolute ceiling with that defensive line. And TJ Guy, to me, could creep his way in the first round of the NFL draft. He's that talented. So they come in at number 5. I think they're going to be a top-tier defense overall, but that defensive line especially, top 5 in the country. So we got them at number 5. Number 4, I got the Penn State Nittany Lions. Danny Dennis-Sutton obviously headlines that group, 13 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, 9 pressures. Zane Durant at tackle also was very good last year. 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 4 pressures. And then Zariah Fisher, who was hurt last year, but the year before when he wasn't hurt, 4 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and a pressure. Again, he missed all of the season last year. And then Alonzo Ford, who had 4 tackles for loss. And then 23rd in sacks per game. They were top 10 in both rush yards allowed and tackles for loss per game. A really good defensive line last year. They lost some guys like obviously Abdul Carter, but they still have a really, really good defensive front. And now you got Jim Knowles, a defensive coordinator, who to me is the best defensive play caller in college football. It's either him or Phil Parker at Iowa, but I would give the edge to Jim Knowles just because he's done it at so many different places, Oklahoma State, Ohio State, and now I think he'll do it at Penn State. And he's got really good players to work with. I think cohesively in the way the scheme works, they're going to be a top 5 group. They haven't come in number 4. I think Danny Dennis-Sutton's going to be a first-round draft pick, and I think Zariah Fisher being back adds a little bit of depth and just a really good starting piece at the edge. And to complement what Danny Dennis-Sutton is, because everyone's going to be focused on him. I think Zariah Fisher being back is not being talked about enough, and I expect big things out of him in 2025. We're going to my top 3 now. The top 3 was probably the hardest ones to grade because I think it's all kind of 1A, 1B, 1C for me. I think it's easily these 4. There's one of them, the team at number 3, is a team that I think if you included the front 7 and made the linebacker core as well as easily number 1, but because you're only doing defensive line, they come in number 3, and it's the Texas Longhorns. Colin Simmons obviously is a star on the edge, 14 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, 9 pressures. Ethan Burke, 9 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a quarterback pressure. He's also on the edge. Travis Shaw and then Cole Brevard were both transfers. Travis Shaw came from North Carolina, 5-star recruit out of high school, 4 tackles for a loss, no quarterback pressure, kind of struggled to find his way on the field. And then Cole Brevard, another transfer, 6 tackles for a loss and 2 sacks last year. Numbers-wise, they were 15th in sacks per game, 13th rush yards allowed, 22nd in tackles for loss per game. Really good defense. They were top-tier defense last year. The only reason I don't have Texas number 1 is because if you could include the linebacker core and include Anthony Hill and include Trey Moore, they're a number 1 group. They're the best front 7. I will say that right now. They're the best front 7 in college football. But in terms of the front 4, they come in number 3 because I still have questions about the interior of the defensive line. You lost a lot from the interior last year. Now, Travis Shaw is a 5-star talent, but he's also just kind of struggled throughout his North Carolina career and all that stuff. So it's interesting to see how he'll do. And then Cole Brevard does not a lot of power conference experience. But Colin Simmons, as an edge rusher, probably the second best in college football. And he's only a sophomore. He did all this as a freshman last year. There's no telling what he can do this year. And then you pair that with the defense of Anthony Hill and Trey Moore. Texas's defense overall is going to be a top 5 group, and their defensive front as a whole. Until I see more from the defensive tackles, I can't put them above 3. But I just trust Sarkisian enough to where I think they will still be a top 3 group. They could be number 1. But I still have just questions on the interior of the defensive line, so they come in at number 3. Number 2, I got the Oklahoma Sooners. Probably not one people were expecting, but R. Mason Thomas is elite, had 11 quarterback pressures, 9 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. Marvin Jones Jr. was a transfer edge they got out of Florida State, who had 6 tackles for loss and 4 sacks and 3 pressures. Grayson Houghton and then Dominic Williams headlined the interior of the defensive line, 5 sacks for Houghton, 1 sack for Williams. And then last year, they were 10 tackles for loss and top 25 in both sacks per game rush yards allowed. Another thing that people aren't talking about is Venables is calling the defense now. Everyone knows how good of a mind Brett Venables is defensively. And you give him a defensive line like this, he could have a monster. They could have a monster year defensively, and I think this defensive line is going to feast in the new scheme of Brett Venables. Because, yes, it kind of was Brett Venables' defense, but it really wasn't because he wasn't calling plays. Now that he's scheming things up on a game day atmosphere, I think they're going to be so good on the defensive line. And I listened to Cole Kubelik because I wasn't sure about Oklahoma's defensive line. Then I listened to Cole Kubelik talk about it, and he thinks they have the best in the SEC. And so I started looking at it more, and I'm like, I kind of agree. It's between them and Texas. Like, Texas and Oklahoma in terms of defensive line, it's like right here. It's really more like right here. Like, it's very, very tight race for us, the best defensive line in the SEC, but I'm giving it to Oklahoma right now. But again, if we're talking about front 7, it's Texas. But until I see more from the interior of the defensive line, I think Oklahoma is a better group, and they come in at number 2. And now for my number 1 defensive line in college football, I got the Clemson Tigers. I had them as my number 1 receiver room, and here they are as my number 1 defensive line. TJ Parker, the best edge rusher in college football. I said Colin Simmons was 2. That's because TJ Parker's 1. 17 tackles for loss and 11 sacks and 5 pressures. And Peter Woods, defensive tackle, 7 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 2 pressures. And Stefan Green, 3 tackles for loss and a sack and 3 pressures. Then Will Hite, who they got out of Purdue, a very underrated portal get. Dabo didn't use the portal much, but he did right here and got a really good get out of Purdue. 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks, 5 pressures. Numbers-wise, they were 24th tackles for loss, 37 sacks per game, 85th in rush yards allowed. Now, I understand that I had Clemson as my number one receiver most of it, but I think Clemson is going to have the best defensive line as well heading into 2025 because of the experience returning, the talent on that group, and moving Peter Woods from edge to defensive tackle. I think boosts this defensive line even more. They're extremely talented. You got 2 top 5 defensive linemen in the country on the same team. And you're talking about one of the best teams overall in the country. I think the defensive line is the best part of it. I think they're the best defensive line in college football heading into this season. I fully believe that. And I think they're going to win a lot of games because of the defensive front. I think they're going to get after the quarterback like crazy this year. Just to get another, and moving Peter Woods to defensive tackle was something that didn't get talked about enough. And I think it's going to show off this year. And that's why he's going to be a top 30, top 15 pick in the draft. And then Will Hite at edge is going to support T.J. Parker because the scouting reports on T.J. Parker, not Will Hite, and Will Hite's going to shine because of that as well. So to me, they have the number one defensive line in the country. They also have the number one receiver in the country. That should tell you something how I feel about the Clemson Tigers this year. I think they're national championship good. And I think with the best defensive line, the best receiver room in the country, they can easily win the national championship. And if I had to pick today, I think they would win the national championship. So that's how I feel about Clemson. Those are my top 10 defensive lines in 2025. Again, I got Notre Dame, Alabama at number 9, Florida number 8, Texas Tech number 7, Miami number 6, number 5 I got Michigan, number 4 is Penn State, number 3 is Texas, number 2 is Oklahoma, and number 1 is the Clemson Tigers. Let me know in the comments what y'all think are the top 10 defensive lines. And again, if you like this video and like this content, please subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. More videos coming soon, more rankings coming soon. We're about a week away from my conference previews and predictions, so we'll get into that in the next week. And thank y'all for watching. Hope y'all enjoy the rest of your day. See ya.